Welcome, everybody, to the February 2024 meeting of the Central Florida Astronomical Society. Thank you for joining us, everybody. And if you're watching this and you're not a member yet, you may be wondering, why the heck should I join your organization? Well, allow me to enumerate the reasons why. For one thing, you get access to our private events and dark sky viewing locations, including our Geneva, Florida location, weather permitting. And weather's been a little bit dodgy this winter, I admit, but it'll get better, guys, I promise. You have access to our Loaner Telescope program, where you can check out a telescope and play with it for a couple of months just to get the hang of it before you go off and buy one for your own. We have a vibrant online community through the Groups IO platform, where we can learn and meet other fellow like-minded amateur astronomers. Also, we have our quarterly meetings at the Seminole State Planetarium, probably the coolest location you can have for an astronomy meeting. Next one coming up on March 2nd, by the way, so more about that later. You're also get Astronomical League membership as part of your membership with CFAS. That's part of the deal, and that includes the Reflector magazine and all the benefits of the AL. We are a nonprofit 501c3 organization, 100% volunteer powered. We're just a bunch of space nerds trying to share our passion with the local community. And if you want to join up, head on over to cfas.org. Go do that now. Open up a browser tab. You know you have 100 of them already. What's one more? cfas.org. Go check it out and sign up. My name is Frank Kane. You're not the president you deserve, but the president you need. Today's agenda, we're going to start off right with our main speaker, Kelly Weinersmith, author of A City on Mars. We'll follow that up with some club news. Stick around for that, because there's a lot coming up in the club that you want to hear about. And we'll wrap things up with our Astrophotography Showcase, as always. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you do have questions for our speaker, hit that Q&A button down at the bottom there, and we'll attack any questions we can at the end. And with that, allow me to introduce our main speaker tonight. Dr. Kelly Weinersmith is an adjunct faculty member in the Biosciences Department at Rice University. Her research has been featured in The Atlantic, National Geographic, BBC World, Science, and Nature. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelly Weinersmith. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are excited to have you. Absolutely. Yeah, awesome book. So thank you for writing it, first of all. Very much an eye-opener, and I think it's very relevant to our audience out here in Central Florida. Kennedy Space Center is right down the street from us, and we see launches like twice a week these days. So
I'm jealous.
Well, when they launch at 1 a.m., you might not be, because that can get pretty old. But yeah, for the most part, it's pretty darn cool, I'll admit. But yeah, I just want to talk to you about this book and kind of like even a little overview about what it's about, and answer some questions about, can we settle space? Should we settle space? And have we really thought this through? So let me start by asking you, what prompted you to write this book? How did you get here?
Well, so I would love to see space settlements be a reality. I think that would be really cool. And I'm also a sci-fi nerd, but probably exactly why I ended up writing this book is because my husband and I had written a prior book on emerging technologies called Soonish. Yep. And one chapter was about cheap access to space, which ended up almost exclusively being about how awesome SpaceX is and how it's rapidly dropping the cost of sending stuff to space. And then we had another chapter about asteroid mining and how the main purpose would probably be to produce materials that you could use to start settlements, or that you could use in space rather than bringing them back to Earth. And to us, after reading that, we felt like, oh, we're going to finally have settlements. Like, the hard part was being able to ship, our little habitats up there. And now we're going to be able to do that. And then we can use space resources to keep them going. So let's write the guide to the next decade for space settlement. But then that's not the book we ended up writing.
So what is the book you ended up writing? How did that differ from what you set out for?
Well, so my husband and I both spent 4 years where every day we sat down for a couple hours and read the primary literature, and then we'd go on walks and discuss it. And about 2 years in, we started to think, this is not going to happen probably in the next decade. And if it did, there's probably a lot of reasons why that wouldn't be good. In particular, we just really don't know enough about how human bodies are going to respond to partial gravity and space radiation. And there's some sort of legal things that it would be nice to clarify before we go out there. And we don't really know how to do recycling in space very well. So the book we ended up writing was all about the stuff we still need to solve, which is all awesome. And hopefully, I think many fun careers could be spent trying to figure it out. But, the stuff that we still need to figure out, and the potential risks if we do go out there before we sort of figure this stuff out. But most of those risks are for those of us left behind on Earth.
Yeah, and that's kind of the message I want to convey to our members. We have a lot of people here who work for NASA, who work for SpaceX, who work for Blue Origin. And guys, you got to get on this stuff. There's some important problems to solve out there. And I know
it's not their fault, though.
No,
You're right.
no,
The funding is the problem, I think, in a lot of cases.
absolutely. Yeah. So, there's lots of funding for big rockets, but what do you do after the rocket lands? Yeah, not so much.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, this is just kind of where the research led you, right? Your partial bibliography is longer than some books I've read, and it's partial. So, how long did it take you to write this book, and what kind of research went into it?
It was 4 years, and so my husband would read like textbooks or sort of review papers, and his job was sort of get the overview, and then we decide like, okay, what is it that we really want to cover in a particular chapter, and then my job would be to go into the primary literature and read the studies where they figured out the facts that we were finding in the review papers, and sort of think about how good those experiments were, and then I also read a bunch of space law textbooks. And so it was a combination of just reading a ton, which was really fun. Actually, it was almost like, getting to spend a PhD's worth of time just reading about all of these cool, fun topics. And then we would shoot the chapter back and forth, and then we'd send it to experts to get them to do sort of a check to make sure we weren't missing anything or misinterpreting. And 4 years later, we had a book, even though we promised it in two.
Close enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. Like, did you have to learn Russian along the way to actually read some of these papers?
I didn't have to, but it was really fun. And so, and also this happened during COVID, and I needed a hobby that like takes all of your focus so that you don't think about how horrible everything else is. And Russian is really hard. And so and I'm not good at it, but I did spend some time learning Russian because I wanted to eventually be able to read the Russian literature. With ChatGPT working with me, I can get through the Russian literature now, and I like know where to find the stuff. I know just enough Russian to like find what I need. But I am not fluent.
Still, that's pretty impressive.
Thanks.
Cool.
It was fun.
Yep. Yeah, so let's start by talking about the moon. The book kind of talks a lot about the moon and also the Mars. So let's start closer to home with the
Mhm.
moon. So let's talk about some of the challenges of living on the moon. What are some of the problems that we might face if we try to have people living there?
So I think most of the people who are really excited about settlement think of the moon as a place where we can go to learn a lot of important stuff, but not as a place where we'll probably ever be able to have a completely self-sustaining settlement. So some of the challenges, and I'm sure your audience knows, the moon has water. Mostly, it's in ice on the poles, and it's kind of hard to get. It's like kind of like stone at this point. It's really really cold, and there's not that much of it. So you often hear proposals for like, this, that, or the other company wants to go out there and split it into hydrogen and oxygen and sell it as propellant to make sort of gas stations so you can get to Mars. My sense is you'd burn through it pretty quickly. And if you burn it into the vacuum of space, you never get it back. So not a lot of water. The nights last for 2 Earth weeks. So that's going to make battery packs for your solar panels really tough. It's covered in that awful regolith, which is just like, under a microscope, it looks like little glass and stone knives. It's very sharp. It also clings to everything. And there's some concern that if you breathed it in, it could scar your lungs and you'd get what's called stone grinders disease. It's also in the vacuum of space, so you're gonna die without a spacesuit, and it's exposed to all of space's radiation because it doesn't have, a nice atmosphere or a magnetosphere that's great like Earth's. Need I go on? It also doesn't have a lot of the stuff that you need to grow plants. And so it's missing a bunch of stuff that we would have to bring from Earth. But it would be a good place to like test out your equipment, make sure your habitats are good at recycling things, see how bad that space radiation and partial gravity problem is for human bodies at a place where you can get back in a couple days.
Exactly.
So good learning ground, but a harsh place to spend generations.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had a speaker a few years ago about regolith and the challenges they're facing. They are doing some research down the street here at Kennedy Space Center about that. So somebody's working on that problem at least.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
great.
yeah, something about static charges to get it off your spacesuit. I forget the details, but
I
hopefully
saw
they'll
one
figure it out.
proposal that was essentially just like, so the people who work with asbestos essentially just have like disposable jumpsuits and
Mhm.
they just kind of throw them away after. And I wonder if that would just be like, that seems like a very easy solution rather than worrying about electrostatic stuff. But it's wasteful and you're going to need to recycle. And it'll be interesting to see what solution we stick with in the future.
Right, right, absolutely. Yeah, regolith is a problem. I think I've seen like concepts from Blue Origin about legit space colonies on the moon, though. So somebody's dreaming about this at least. And
So there's a difference between being able to have a colony there and then being able to have it self-sustaining. So
Mhm.
like if it regularly had resupplies from Earth, maybe you could make it work. But it would be tough to make it so that the moon could survive if no rocket ever, or people on the moon could survive if no rocket ever took off from Earth again. That would be
Right.
tough.
Yeah, it turns out when the moon was blasted off from Earth, like a lot of its volatiles got vaporized away in the process. And I think that's why there's not a whole lot of carbon on there, right? Which is kind of a big deal. You kind of need that.
We are carbon-based life forms that mostly eat carbon-based life forms. And so, yes, that will be a problem. We'll need to ship a lot of that up. It was funny when we were doing our research, one of the fun facts we came across was that probably the most concentrated sources of carbon on the moon are the feces and vomit bags left behind by the Apollo astronauts.
Yes.
But I think NASA would frown upon you if you made a garden out of Neil Armstrong's feces, because I think those are like heritage
Yeah,
materials
I
now.
think
You
they're
got
actually, yeah, they're protected sites, I believe.
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, no poo bags. That reminds me of a story about John Young. And if you ever ask him about what it's like going to the moon, he'll say, we're all adults here. So uh, the thing that he says is, well, the best thing about being on the moon is that you can finally take a dump. Because apparently there's something about zero gravity that messes up your digestive system. But anyway.
But probably it's also embarrassment a little bit. Wasn't there the story about Borman who was on the Gemini mission with Lovell and they were supposed to be up there for something like 14 days and Borman made it 8 days without pooping? Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
I've heard that too.
yeah.
Yeah,
He
it's a
got so
problem.
close.
I
Yeah.
know, like, little mundane things like waste management is a big deal in space, right? I mean, like, even SpaceX has been having trouble with their toilets on the Dragon capsule lately, and that does not sound pleasant. My
No,
gosh.
literally every spacecraft that we read about, you could find stories about feces escaping and how
Mhm.
unpleasant that was. I guess on the shuttle they would refer to them as brown trout that were sort of like swimming upstream, and it's yeah, waste management in space is gross.
Yeah, yeah. Well, enough about that. So,
Sorry, everyone.
but no, but back to the moon. So yeah, the other thing is radiation, right? So I think a lot of people don't really appreciate the fact that on the ISS, you're still protected by the magnetosphere. You're not really exposed to the full blast of solar radiation on the ISS. On the moon, not so much. I mean, depending what side you're on, the moon itself will shield you. Um, but yeah, that's not something we know a lot about, right?
No, it's not. And so to be honest, when we started researching the book, we started with health risks. And this was a really big surprise to me because I figured, we've had space stations up there for decades, before the International Space Stations. You had the Solutes and Mir, and I thought we had tons of data on this stuff. And it took a while for me to realize, like, oh, but that data is not relevant to the moon or Mars because those astronauts are mostly protected by the magnetosphere. And so, I had imagined going into this research project, these, glass habitats on the moon or Mars that where you could like look through and beautifully see, Earthrise or the sunrise on Mars. But all the proposals that I read involved covering the habitat in like a meter or more of regolith to protect you from that radiation because you don't want it getting into your habitat. And so I do think it's not an underappreciated problem for the community of people who study settlement. They know it's a problem. But I think that when you talk to the average person on the street who knows as much about settlement as I did going into the project, we are surprised to learn you're not going to get those glass domes. You're going to be sort of living in an anthill.
Yeah, it's kind of a buzzkill, living in a hole like a mole as opposed to like this glorious glass dome looking up at the skies of space all the time. But that's reality. That glass dome is going to do more harm than good, right?
Yeah. I read a book by Brent Sherwood. He's a space architecture guy, and he pretty much said, you look at those rotating space stations, those pictures of like glass outer walls, they would be baking in the radiation and they'd, be dying of cancer. But I do think that the moon has lava tubes, and those seem pretty epic to me. Like I wouldn't be bummed out going to the moon and living inside of a giant lava tube. Like that seems kind of cool. I'd watch that reality TV show.
Oh man, that's actually been in a proposal for getting people to Mars, but we'll
Oh,
get there in a bit. The whole one-way trip to Mars reality show, but yeah,
Mars
that didn't
one,
end
yeah.
well. Yeah,
Mm-mm.
cool. Yeah, and the other thing is just the limited resources. You mentioned about the water. There's been a lot of talk about water at the lunar South Pole, or well, either pole, I imagine. But
Mhm.
the reality is, it's not a whole lot of water on the moon to go around, right?
Yeah, there's not a lot, and if you lose it to the vacuum of space, there's no getting it back. So on Earth, the nice thing is if you use the water cycle, you can recycle it and get it back. You don't get that benefit on the moon, and you're going to need a lot of water if you want a self-sustaining settlement. So we might be bringing some water with us. And so not only is the water resources sort of limited, but they're also located in like very small spots on the poles, as you mentioned. These are also areas where we're probably going to want to start our settlements because the water is inside of craters. And so these craters never see the sun. And that's how you manage to get that ice so it doesn't sort of vaporize into the vacuum of space. But the crater rims are some of the best places to set up your solar panels. So if you're on the equator, you need enough battery packs to get you through a 2-week-long nighttime period. That's intense. That's going to be a lot of battery packs. But if you're at these peaks of eternal light, you don't actually get eternal light, but you get something like 90% light if you put your solar panels up high enough. And so this is actually a pretty small area. I think the peaks of eternal light are something like 1/100th of a billionth of the surface area of the moon. And so these are probably the places the US and China are going to go first if they're thinking about, setting up research stations or settlements.
Right, right. And that's a problem, right? Like you think about the space as being this vast, infinite resource, but in reality, the places you want to be on the moon are very, very small, and there's going to be competition around those sites. So
Yeah, exactly.
the first country to get there is going to have a huge advantage, which could be a recipe for conflict, right?
Could be. Yep. Yeah, right. And those two countries are probably going to be China or the US. And we're already seeing some conflict between those nuclear powered countries already. You don't necessarily want to heat things up if you can avoid it.
Indeed, indeed. Let's hope for the best there.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. But I mean, I think I read in your book they're really only the equivalent of like a small lake's worth of water on the moon in total. Is that what I remember right?
Yeah, so we looked up Sardis Lake is a man-made lake in, I think, Missouri, and it's a lake that none of us have heard of because it's not that big. And the moon has about that much water
Right.
for all the people that would ever want to live there and all the purposes they would ever want to use it for. There is technically some water you could extract out of the regolith, but that's also technically true of concrete, which is a wetter material than the regolith. So probably you're not going to want to be getting it from there.
Right, right. So any long-term settlement on the moon or even long-term research is going to require shipments of water from Earth because that's not going to last very long. So
that or really, really, really good recycling to stretch that out for a long time. But yes, probably eventually we're going to want to bring water up there. Or there are proposals for going out to the asteroids and getting water from the asteroids and bringing that to the moon because then you don't have to ship it out of Earth's gravity well. So maybe that's where it will come from in the future, but the moon will probably need some water supplementation at some point if we use it a lot.
of course, there's a problem of how do I get an asteroid or a comet down to the moon without wiping everyone out in the process. That's
Yeah, the dinosaurs would say you should worry about that.
absolutely. Oh man, so let's move on to Mars. So actually, let me check the Q&A first here and see if we have any relevant questions before I move on.
Okay.
Yeah, John Pinto says we'll live like hobbits on the moon and Mars. Yeah, John, it's looking that way. What do you think, hobbits or something better than hobbits?
Is the implication that something about space will make us short as well with hairy toes, or just that we'll be living in like
Hobbit holes.
under hobbit holes? Yeah, it'll kind of be like hobbit holes. I'm not sure it'll be as beautiful as the New Zealand scenery, but yeah, we might be like hobbits.
Yep, cool. Luke Horan asks, how do we know the total amount of water on the moon? So yeah, where did that number come from?
Yeah, oh, that's great. So a lot of our estimates, I think, come from lacrosse, and I forget what that acronym stands for right now. But we essentially slammed something into the ice and sort of measured what came out. And then I think a lot of the estimates come from like aerial photos, and they are estimates with big error bars. And so we're not completely sure, but the estimates that we used in the book were some of the upper estimates. And maybe our measurements are wrong and there's quite a bit more, but it would be surprising.
Yep. And Luke also asked, what are the plans for dealing with the psychological issues of living underground most of the time? Yeah, I was going to get to that, Luke, but let's go there. So how could that not end well? People get shipped out to Mars for 2 years and they live in a lava tube with 1,000 other people, and they might not get along and they might not enjoy that very much, right?
Right. And that problem will be magnified on Mars when it's expensive and hard to get home. So, on the moon, if you had the money, it's 2 to 3 days to get home. So that's kind of a pressure valve. So to research that question, we looked at the history of Arctic exploration. So these are people where you had, really big crews in a really cramped space. They couldn't get away from each other. They were under, potentially life-threatening situations. And then we also looked at life on Antarctic research stations and life in submarines. So these are all isolated and confined environments where you're stuck with people you didn't necessarily choose to be with for long periods of time, and you can't escape, and it's hard to contact loved ones at home. And actually, the psychology outcomes in those situations are usually pretty good. Like they're not usually that much worse than the average population. And in some cases, it seems like they do better. And that probably comes down to selection in some cases. So like on submarines, they're part of the Navy. They had to go through a selection process. They're regularly screened for mental health stuff. And they have some support if things are going wrong. And so to me, I'm not necessarily worried about people going to the moon and sort of losing it because of the conditions. Although if you open it up to everyone and you don't have these sort of screening procedures, maybe you would have more problems in these isolated and confined environments. But to me, the more important thing is like, even when we're not living in isolated and confined environments, we all, not all of us, but many of us have mental health problems anyway. And we're going to need to be able to just deal with that sort of stuff wherever we are. And, medication, we don't know how shelf stable it's going to be in the presence of radiation. The moon, one of the benefits is if you do want to talk to a psychiatrist or a psychologist back home, there's maybe a second delay or something like that. You can have a pretty close to live conversation with them. If you're on Mars, the delay is going to be 3 minutes to 22 minutes long. So you're not going to be able to have a real-time conversation. So maybe you want to think about bringing a psychologist. But things get really uncomfortable when you think about, if somebody has a problem where they're a danger to themselves or they become a danger to the rest of the crew, what do you do with that person? And in an environment where everything is, so like it depends on technology. If you worry about somebody having a break and, trying to get out the airlock, that could be bad for everybody. And so, do you have do you just bring a module specifically to lock people up for their own safety or for your safety? Or, on the ISS, they've never had to do this, but they do have a bit of the handbook where they talk about how you can sedate somebody and like use bungees to sort of keep them in one spot so they can't get away and so they can't hurt themselves. So you're going to need to plan for this kind of stuff, even if it's not worse psychologically to be out there than it is on Earth.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important to realize that astronauts are very carefully selected. And that's, probably a big reason why we haven't had any big drama in space that we know of anyway. I think there was
they
one
lie.
story. Yes.
They lie a lot. And so like we've read a bunch of biographies and like they are strongly incentivized to not admit if they're having anxiety or depression. I think Terry Virts in his biography said that if he was having a bad day, he would tell the psychologist he was fine. Mike Mullane admitted to this was back in the days before there were electronic records. He admitted to pulling the papers out of his medical records that had problems he didn't want the doctors to know about and just sort of throwing those out before he gave it to the doctors. I mean, when you talk to a psychiatrist or any medical professional, they either ground you or you get to move forward. And so there's a very strong incentive for saying, we're fine. So maybe we don't have great data about what life is like in space because astronauts want to keep being astronauts because it's the greatest job ever.
Good point. Yeah, I'm reading Moonshot by Mike Massimino right now, and he has a couple of stories like that in there as well.
Yeah, about his vision?
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. Like he just basically cheated on the vision exam just so, he could go to space. But beyond that, he also has this story of where he's doing his first spacewalk and he confesses to just how freaking terrifying it is out there, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh, that's the coolest thing in the world. But no, he was scared out of his mind out there, but he would never admit to it at the time, right? Because he wants to do it again. So
what Michael Collins, his job was to work on the spacesuits and he got claustrophobic in them and called them nasty little coffins, but he didn't admit that to anybody. And so, when he did his first spacewalk, he knew he might have a panic attack because it's he was petrified, but he didn't tell anyone about it. It went fine. But yeah, there's not a lot of honesty in the moment if someone's scared.
But the moral of the story is you gotta have the right stuff to some extent, And if you're just saying, hey, anyone who wants to sell their house and go to Mars, hop on my starship and we'll hope for the best, it's probably not going to end well. So something to think about.
Or at least you got to plan for it.
Yeah.
You plan differently in that situation, I think.
That's fair. Before I move on more to the Mars, John Pinto has a question about setting up remote controlled telescopes on the moon. I think that's an awesome idea.
Yeah.
Why not? So, but yeah, again, that's an example of where, you can just go up there and do it and go back and you'll be fine. Right. So.
Yeah. And I think a lot of there are plans for fancy telescopes on the far side of the moon, right?
Right.
Where and so that becomes sort of an interesting property problem, because if you set them up and anybody's doing anything else on the far side of the moon, that messes up your ability to get the data, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah. So again, limited resources,
Hmm.
the root of the issue there. But yeah, going back to Mars. So, we talked about the regolith on the moon being an issue. On Mars, there's a whole different problem with the soil, right?
Yeah. So 1% of it is perchlorates, which is a hormone or an endocrine disrupting chemical. So essentially it binds to your thyroid and it messes up the hormones your thyroid produces, and they control things like your heart rate and your blood pressure. And so I've talked to people about this being a problem, and I'm often reminded by space advocates that it's water soluble, so you could rinse it out. But I feel like there's a difference between knowing that and then actually planting your seeds in that soil. So like, my husband and I, we bought a farm, and if someone had said to us like 1% of the dirt has endocrine disrupting hormones that we know because studies have shown plants take up, and you'll be feeding these plants to your kids, but just rinse it real good first. I wouldn't be super convinced, but so that's a good argument for things like hydroponics or aquaponics or whatever, stuff that just uses water. You can make sure it's really clean. But it's complicated. Everything about Mars is complicated. It's still jagged. That dust kicks up into storms that cover the entire planet for like weeks at a time. So you got to worry about your solar panels. Probably you're going to need nuclear power, which we haven't totally figured out yet. But we're working on that. Not me,
Yeah.
but
Well, that's another point that I kind of forgot. Like I knew this, but I kind of selectively forgot about it in the context of Mars. Like electromagnetic radiation does not fall off linearly with distance, it's exponentially. So there's actually much less solar power on Mars than you might think. And that's a problem, right?
yeah, that's going to be a problem. And then when you couple that with the dust storms that you have to worry about, it becomes even more of a problem. And so a lot of the advocates that we talked to said that, probably we'll have solar panels, but you're really going to also need to have, nuclear reactors that you bring with us to space so that you will always have a reliable source of power no matter what the dust is doing. And
Mhm.
people are working on small reactors that you could bring. And so we're getting there. But I mean, that's geopolitically a little bit complicated, trying to get enough of the radioactive material to make these and then getting permission to fly them into space. Could be done, but it's a little tough right now with the world not being, at least the US not being quite as pro-nuclear as you would maybe want them to be if you wanted to use that method.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in their defense, I did read something recently about these kilopower reactors that NASA's
Mhm.
supposedly working on, right? So that seems like a step in the right direction.
Yeah, the Krusty reactor. What I love is
Mm.
that the kilo power reactor people are Simpson fans, so all of their different designs have Simpson related acronyms. There's like Duff and Krusty, and anyway, they made it really fun to read about. Yeah, really fun to read about them.
Awesome, awesome. But I mean, the real problem with Mars is just the orbital mechanics, right? Like once you go, it only comes around every 2 years. And once you're
Mhm.
heading out there, you're gone for 2 years, right? Like unless you
Yeah,
want to spend a lot of fuel to get back.
right. And most proposals require 6 months to get there. And so during that 6 months, you might be exposed to, the like no gravity, which is probably not going to be good for our bones. There are proposals for spinning the station on the way to Mars that, of course, makes it much more technologically complicated. But, we know that being in a zero gravity or a free fall situation like you find on the International Space Station is bad for our bones. Astronauts lose about 1% of the bone density in their hips every month. And so, you're going to be getting that plus muscle loss. And often astronauts have problems with their vision after they spend time in space. They become more nearsighted, and we don't know why, but we think it might have to do with fluid shifting up because you don't have gravity to pull it down. And that sort of presses on the eyes and causes some problems. These problems persist for a long time. So after this 6 month journey, you're going to be quite a bit weaker. Like right now, it's sort of a point of honor if after you land from your journey on the ISS, you can actually stand up on your own when you get out of the capsule. When people get to Mars, they're going to have to stand up and, maybe set up their habitat or something. So yeah, it's going to be complicated. And if something goes wrong, as you said, because of orbital mechanics, you probably can't send anyone to help them for about 2 years.
That's right. If you get if your nuclear reactor breaks down, you can't just order a replacement part from Amazon unless you like 2 year delivery, right? And
That's right. Bezos needs to get on that.
well, he does own Blue Origin, so maybe that's not so far fetched. But you still can't
Mhm.
get around the 2 year delivery time.
That's right.
And I think it would be Probably not going to get free shipping on that one if I had to guess.
Yeah, I'd bet against it.
But I mean, taking the ISS as an example, like what is the likelihood of actually going 2 years without some horrible unforeseen problem? I mean, things break on the ISS pretty often, right? And they're right there. Like they can get help pretty quickly.
Yeah, right. So if something catastrophic happened, they could be home in 24 hours and they very regularly get resupplies. And so to me, one of the most pressing problems for a settlement is we don't have good data on how long this equipment, the equipment that you need on Mars, how long it's going to last. And ideally, not only would you know like well, how many carbon filters are we going to need, how often is the toilet going to break, what repair parts do we need for that, but when you're talking about a settlement and living there forever, you're going to want to have habit or facilities for recycling things. So you're going to want to clean the water and reuse it. You're going to want to capture the vapor that comes off of your breath. I think the astronauts on the ISS call water yesterday's coffee because they do a little bit of urine recycling to use the water again. But if you're living on Mars, you're going to want to, find enough, make sure you have enough plants to remove the carbon dioxide from the air and produce more oxygen. And we just don't really have those equations figured out yet. So there are facilities like China has the Lunar Palace, and I forget what the acronym is, but their acronym game is good. And so, but yeah, I forget what it stands for exactly, but like they recently did a run of their system where they weren't producing enough oxygen. So they had three big guys running in the sim at the time, and they had to swap out two big guys for two smaller women so that they would have enough oxygen. And like, needless to say, that would be death on Mars. And so there's a lot we still need to figure out if we're, hoping to live there long term.
Yeah, it's really scary. I mean, you can't just like go to Mars and like walk around a little bit and come back home. Like it's a long-term commitment and you got to be prepared for that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, what makes me really nervous is where are we going to get the money to run this kind of stuff? So, like, maybe there'll be spin-off technologies. And you could argue that finding out these sorts of equations for recycling could be good for understanding how our planet works at a time where we really should be thinking about how we can be efficient with our resources. But it is hard to imagine how you're going to get enough money to run many of these facilities to work all of these problems out before you head out there.
mhm. Yeah, that touches on another question I had. Like we focus a lot on the rockets. There's plenty of funding for building awesome rockets, but what you do after the rocket gets there, like I'm not sure if there's really no funding for it or if we just don't hear about it because it's not as sexy as giant cool rockets, right? Do you have any insight as to what's really going on there?
So I do think it's hard to get funding for a lot of this stuff. So for the medical stuff, there's like a company called Spaceborne United, and they're working on doing in vitro fertilization in space. And so they're trying to like one big data gap is reproduction in space. So we have sent up, rats for like a small part of their gestation or mice for a little while, and geckos, but we haven't done anything systematic because the International Space Station was not explicitly set up as a like training ground for settlement. So we sort of get the pieces of data where we can. And so what we really need is some sort of systematic program to collect these data. And I think that for Spaceborne United, they're hoping that doing IVF in space will help them sort of develop some novel technology for IVF that they can then patent. It's kind of hard to know if that's going to work. Like this is also complicated, adding being in free fall to it. But I'm hoping it works out for them because they're trying to solve these problems. But it is in a lot of cases hard to imagine that the companies are going to be profitable on this journey. And at the moment, there's not a lot of government funds to collect these data. I wish Musk had not bought Twitter and was instead investing in these kinds of questions. But
Mhm.
but who am I to say what he should do with his money?
Yeah, indeed, that did derail things a little bit.
Hmm.
Now, you mentioned briefly at the end of the book, I think that China is actually doing some research on that subject. Like they sent a couple of primates up to see what happened. Do you know what happened with that?
I don't. That, you know what? That's a great question. That is something I can't believe I haven't followed up on. But yeah, no, when we wrote the book, they were sending the monkeys up, and we weren't sure that anything would happen. Like animals take a while to acclimate to being in zero G, and then you've got all these weird humans around. I'll let you know if I find anything.
Cool. Because yeah, there is a chance that it'll be fine. Maybe we can
Yeah.
reproduce in space, and maybe pregnancy works just fine, and we don't need the giant centrifuges that you talk about in the book for raising children.
I,
Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think advocates would argue that, when we started going into space, we were like, oh, people, doctors would be like, oh, are they even going to be able to swallow without the help of gravity? And there we do have a long history of thinking space is going to be worse than it really is. But I think that when you're talking about having babies in space, there's a couple more boxes you want to check. Like, okay, we've done our due diligence to make sure that we can do this pretty safely before you move forward. But you're right, it might be fine.
Yeah, same with radiation, right? Like we don't
Hmm.
really know what the impact of radiation out there is going to be, and unfortunately, there's no really ethical way to find out on humans. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see a research station on the moon where you have like rodents going through generations and you see how that goes. But we don't have that yet.
Yep, just a lot of scary unknowns, and hopefully the
Hmm.
plan isn't just to have people sign a waiver and hope for the best. We can do better, humanity.
I think so, especially if kids are involved. Like I'm a little bit more comfortable with adults going and making this decision and just risking their lives. But when you start talking about needing to have kids out there, I feel like it gets more ethically complicated.
Absolutely. Before I move on to our next section here, a couple of questions here. So, more of a comment, I guess, from Yamil Gassel. He says, as an architect who has managed many complicated projects here on Earth, I can only imagine the complexities of designing habitats on the moon and Mars. Legal issues notwithstanding, it's bad enough here on Earth. There's so many issues, structural, mechanical, electrical, radiation, air quality, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be such a challenge with little historical precedents to fall back on. This is really an up and coming specialty and challenge for future architects and engineers.
Amen.
Yep.
Him Ben Arroyo, I hope I said his name right, has written some interesting books about building habitats on the moon, and Brent Sherwood has a neat edited volume about space architecture. If you're interested in reading more, but yeah, it's going to be complicated.
Absolutely. But potentially exciting. That'd be a
Yeah,
pretty darn cool thing to work on, if you ask me.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. David LeGros, this goes back to when we were talking about astronauts lying about things.
Uh-huh.
uh, I'm not sure I understand the reference here, David. He says, and don't forget about the couple that wasn't, but were married too late. Is that?
Or so I think that you're referring to Jan. So there were a shuttle. There was a shuttle mission where two people fell in love, and I thought they got married on the sly,
That's it.
and they were married when they went up, and they are the center of the debate about whether or not coupling has happened in space.
Indeed.
Yes.
Indeed. And a little plug for the book. There is a brief chapter in here on the physics involved at that. Um, Probably a solvable problem, but it's not as
I,
easy as it might sound.
I'm sure we'll figure it out.
I, they're highly motivated too. So,
That's right.
yes.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk a little bit about space billionaires. We got a couple out here that show up once in a while. So you mentioned, being a science fiction fan earlier, and I think we all are here today. So Elon Musk, big Star Wars fan. Jeff Bezos, big Star Trek fan. First of all, what are you?
Uh, I'm more of a Star Wars fan,
Really?
but not the
Cool.
new stuff.
Yeah, it's about 50-50 within the club I found. So that's cool. Both of them like Ian Banks. So, that's very much a positive vision of humanity. We're like, we're settling space and things are awesome and humanity gets it all together. But do you think
Woo.
that's just a lot of their drive for trying to make this happen? Like, are they just trying to reclaim this vision from the 80s when they were a kid of what science fiction should be? And
Hmm.
is that a bad thing? Is that a bad goal for humanity to have,
That
even if it
also
might be
that's
unrealistic?
sorry, that's interesting. So most of the time when I'm asked about Bezos and Musk, I'm asked why are they pretending to be interested in space? Like, what is the financial benefit
Mm.
or something like that? And I always end up needing to defend Bezos and Musk by saying like, no, 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 Bezos' valedictorian speech was about wanting to do these rotating space stations. Musk has been a sci-fi geek since he was a kid. Like, they both really are interested in these topics. And I think part of it is wanting to create the awesome sci-fi futures that they were reading about. But I believe that both of them genuinely think that space is going to be important for so for Musk, he wants it as a plan B for humanity. So if we're multiplanetary and something happens to Earth, our species will persist. And to me, that is one of the better arguments for settling space. But I think you need to have like a little asterisk, or however you say that, where it's not going to happen fast. Like, in order for a Mars settlement to survive the loss of Earth, I think that could be generations. Like, I think for a long time, it'll just be like humans on Mars die a little more slowly than humans on Earth because they're going to need resupply from Earth for a long time. But Bezos, I mean, you never know what someone really thinks, but I believe that he really thinks that rotating space stations are going to be a way to reduce our burden on Earth by moving people to space and moving heavy industry to space. I'm skeptical about whether or not those benefits will come fast enough to save us from the problems of climate change, which are bearing down on us already. But I don't know. I take them at their word, and I believe that they think that these are important things to do for humanity, and that they want to help do them.
Yeah, and part of it too is just having kind of a positive way to direct our efforts, right? Like it's something that's inspiring and
Yeah.
is unifying to some extent to, get behind building these big things and doing big things as a species. So,
Hmm.
you know, there's that aspect of it too. Like the mere act of trying, I think, is perhaps beneficial.
Yeah. Well, and Musk, after he got his PayPal, and I'm sorry, should I stop interrupting you? I get excited.
No, no, please.
Oh, okay, great, great, great. So after Musk got his big bucks for PayPal, he like actually went to Russia to see if he could like buy some of their rockets, and he wanted to just send like a little greenhouse to Mars just to inspire people, to get them to think about like what you could do. And there's no money in that. So yeah, I think he is big on inspiration and it just being like an exciting, cool thing to inspire humanity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I worked at Amazon during its early years, and the first time I saw Jeff Bezos, he was wearing a Captain Picard outfit. So that should tell you something. But even back then, like if you talk to him, like he would talk about space. Like that was what he was really excited about and interested in. Amazon, not so much. It was more of a means to an end. So
Yeah.
they're definitely sincere. That's for
Yep.
sure.
I believe it. Yeah.
Cool. But your book kind of calls out the point that if we're not careful, if we do this too quickly, it's not going to end up like Star Trek or Star Wars. It's going to end up like The Expanse with belters, flinging asteroids at the Earth and stuff, right? So, how do we get there? Like, how do we prevent that from happening?
Oh man, I wish I had the answer to that problem. So my concern, so like first, as we mentioned, I'm a little concerned about tensions heating up between China and the US as we move out to the moon. And you don't want nuclear powers having, a new Cold War. We don't want that. And Sagan and Ostro wrote a paper, I think in 1994, pointing out that when, humanity has the ability to like deflect asteroids away from Earth, we also could use that to either accidentally or on purpose deflect it into Earth. And I hear people who argue that asteroids are not great weapons of war because they move slowly, they're hard to target. But, terrorists do awful things, dictators do things that don't seem like good ideas in a lot of cases. And also, we miscalculate things. And if you've got heavy mass moving above our gravity well, I find that concerning. I'd like there to be a system to sort of govern like how close you're allowed to get. And I'd like people to have thought about this a little bit more beforehand. But at the moment, we don't have a great legal system for figuring out who gets to go where and who gets to do what. We do have treaties through the United Nations, but we could use more specific legislation, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And this is all, assuming that we do have massive space settlements out there someday and they are fighting with each other for whatever reason. But that's part of your premise, right? Human nature doesn't change just because you're in space necessarily. Like you're still going to have tribalism, you're still going to have bickering over resources. And in space, the stakes are much higher when that goes wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so like I'd like to say that I believe, things like the overview effect where, the view from space makes you sort of more like a philosopher and you see, that the earth is delicate and there's no borders. But you definitely can see borders. I was able to talk to one cosmonaut and I was like, can you see borders? And he's like, obviously, the border between like India and Pakistan is like lit up because they want to make sure no one's crossing it. You can see North Korea and South Korea because North Korea is dark. And I don't think you benefit by pretending those borders don't exist because they represent very real conflicts that need to be dealt with that I don't think a really awesome view is going to, make everybody decide we're not going to keep worrying about these things. And again, if you read astronaut biographies, they come down to Earth and they're jerks like the rest of us. Like I do think astronauts are incredible. They're way smarter, way more physically fit than I am. I don't anyway, I accept all of those things, but they're still humans and they still make mistakes. And I think we're gonna be humans in space like we're humans on Earth.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the overview effect is a thing, but at the end of the day, there's astronauts still have to follow orders from the ground, and the politicians that are telling them what to do might not have that enlightened viewpoint. So
That's
that's
right.
going to be
Yes.
an issue.
Yeah, I wouldn't absolutely the overview effect, I'm sure is a profound feeling. Um, but I don't know if it's going to perfect humanity. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Speaking of The Expanse, I notice you have a endorsement on the back from James S.A. Corey. Well done. So,
Thanks. Yeah.
yep.
They're friends of ours.
Yep.
I'm so excited
Really?
about that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
My gosh, I'm 2 degrees from them. Oh, that's so cool.
We met them before their book came out. And anyway, I remember Ty was making us margaritas when we were at his house, and he was telling us about this new book series he was writing. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I know Ty. He did such a good job. Anyway,
Wow.
Daniel was the one who wrote that. Daniel, I guess I don't know if he's the top or the bottom half of James S.A. Corey, but
Yes.
but he was the one who read it.
Awesome. Yes, for
That's
those who don't
nice.
know, James S.A. Corey is not a real person. It's two people.
Yeah.
But that's cool. That the book and the TV series are just amazing. So if you haven't watched it yet, people go watch it.
Yeah, it's great.
Let's take a break for a couple of questions here. John Pinto says Mars is a reality TV series. Oh, you didn't hear about Mars One, did you? You want to tell the story?
I don't know too much about the story. But I mean, I know there was an organization that went by the name of Mars One who took a bunch of applications for people who were willing to take a one-way trip to Mars. It included people who were willing to like leave behind their, spouse and children to be the first ones to go to Mars. And they wanted to be part of the big, exciting experiment, and which like I totally get. But as I've hopefully to some extent convinced you, we have a lot of work to do. So it wasn't actually feasible to go to Mars around the time that this Mars One project was going. But I think the deal was that they were going to film a reality TV show, and that was going to be how they were going to fund it. And you do still see proposals sometimes for like Mars settlements that talk about reality TV helping to foot the bill. I'm a little skeptical. So like Apollo 11, probably one of the most watched events in human history. But by the start of Apollo 13, viewership had already dropped off dramatically until the oxygen canister blew, and then everybody was watching again. But I think, a lot of life in space is pretty dull. It's cramped spaces. It's on a settlement, it's going to be like subsistence farming. It's going to be cleaning the toilets. And so I don't know how much money you're going to make after season 1, unless you've got a lot of drama. And now you've got psychology problems to deal with.
Well, get the right producers up there, maybe, and they can fabricate some drama for us.
There you go.
We'll see. Luke Corwin asks, what citizenship would these hypothetical space babies have? Ooh, I know you can talk about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, according to the Outer Space Treaty, which is a United Nations treaty that came out in 1967, when you go to space, you can't like land on the moon and appropriate territory. So you can't land on the moon and say this chunk belongs to the US. So it's not clear that those babies would be, US citizens, for example, if they were born on the moon. But when people and companies go to space, they are the responsibility of some country. And so, when Musk will sometimes say, like in his Starlink terms of service, he famously said, if a settlement starts on Mars, we're not going to be beholden to the laws of Earth. We're going to do our own thing. That does straightforwardly break international law. He would be the United States' responsibility. It would be the United States' responsibility to get Elon Musk sort of back in line. And they maybe could do that by not letting his rockets launch their resupply missions until he started, following international law. So my best guess would be that if it was 2 US citizens who went to Mars and had a baby on Mars, it would still be a US baby, but it might depend on each state's rules. So what happens when people have babies on cruise ships? I don't know the answer, but maybe that's the analogous situation.
They don't allow you on if you're very pregnant in the first place. So I think that's an issue they've been avoiding, probably for that very good reason. It's ambiguous.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Not to mention they don't want to deal with the medical aspects. But
yeah, it can be tricky.
But yeah, speaking of the Outer Space Treaty, let's go there. So about a third of the book talks about international space law, and there's a good reason for that. It's kind of important. But the first question I have for you is international law. Like you say, it's a thing in here, but I'm going to challenge you on that. So, the US and China and Russia have all blown stuff up in space and they've gotten away with it. There's been no consequences. I was reading something in the news today about some nuclear weapon that Russia has up there now.
No. They do not have a nuclear weapon up there.
All right, that's what the New York Times told me. But
the New York Times is wrong. And actually, I wrote them this morning to tell them that and asked if I could write an op-ed to clarify. But then some other news site came out with so You are allowed to have nuclear reactors in space to power your satellites. And so it sounds like maybe what was actually happening was that they had a new design for a nuclear powered satellite that could knock out enemy satellites.
Mhm.
But you're right. If it had been a nuclear weapon in space, that would have straightforwardly violated the Outer Space Treaty. But it also would have been a stupid decision for a variety of reasons. So we've set off nuclear weapons in space in the past. And when we did that, it knocked out a bunch of satellites. So it's an indiscriminate weapon. If Russia set off a nuclear weapon in space, they'd knock out their satellites, they'd knock out our satellites, they'd knock out China's satellites. I'm sure that China would not be super happy with Russia. And so anyway, I think the New York Times jumped the gun there. That hasn't happened yet, as far as I can tell. But okay, so yes, we have various countries have shot their own satellites out of space, just as a way to like show other countries they have that capability. When China did it in 2007, there was a lot of anger from the international community because they did it too high and it created a lot of debris that is still in space today. But I don't actually know that those behaviors are violating the Outer Space Treaty. So maybe it's violating the part where you're not supposed to contaminate space, but even for that, you're just supposed to sort of like consult people and be like, I'm gonna do this. But it doesn't even say that, like, after telling people that you have to, it says, you know, like, it would be good if you told people, and it would be good if you listened to their concerns. But the Outer Space Treaty doesn't really say that you can't do that stuff. And interestingly, that part of the treaty came about because the US had sent like thousands of needles into space as a way to like bounce messages back down to Earth in case there was sort of a nuclear war that, or a nuclear weapon set off in space that knocked all of our satellites off. And that made the international community be like, all right, US, maybe we should like ask people to run this stuff by us because that wasn't a good plan. But anyway, so I don't think that violates international law. I do see like international law is sort of a squishy thing. You know, you can argue that, you know, Russia did invade Ukraine. This war has started. That violates territorial sovereignty. That straightforwardly violates international law. There have been tons of sanctions. So there has been a response. It hasn't been the response, you know, that I'm sure the Ukrainians would have wanted, for example. But I guess I think of it as like, just because murder is outlawed doesn't mean it never happens, but there are consequences. But I agree. International law is squishy and sometimes international rules get broken.
So who's supposed to enforce the OST? Like what body is actually out there saying, no, you did a bad thing, bad country? Is that
Yeah,
the
so
UN or what?
yeah, so I mean the UN could be a place where countries come together and be like bad country, but so like if Musk, you know, went to Mars and said, we're violating the OST, I'm claiming sovereignty, this is Moscow, we're creating our own country here, then the international community could sanction the United States and say he's your responsibility. If you don't get him, you know, under control, we're not going to trade with you anymore or something. And so then the question is, with the US being, you know, a very powerful country, would other countries take the risk to do that? That's hard to say, but it's hard for me to imagine that the US would risk that to let Musk have his own independent settlement in space. Like, I don't know how the US government would benefit from that in any way. So anyway, sanctions would probably be one of the first things that would happen.
Yeah. Ukraine is a good parallel there because
Yeah.
that's how we've tried to handle that.
Yeah.
Well,
With mixed success, I guess.
indeed.
Yeah.
But yeah, who would stop Elon Musk though? Like, I guess, you know, he is launching from government controlled spaceports at the end of the day. So yeah,
Well,
we
and
do have
right.
some power.
Yeah. And you know, he's been trying to launch his starships more quickly, but like the FAA keeps holding him up to do like environmental assessments and stuff. And so, you know, he does need government permission before he sends off those ships. And so, you know, the US could say no more resupplies, no more resupply ships for you, which would essentially be death unless you follow the rules.
Yep. Oh man, it's already 55 minutes in. Can you go a little bit longer? Are you good for time?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. This is going so quickly. Yeah, a couple of questions have popped in. So Luke wants to talk about flinging asteroids around. So do you think the question of asteroid redirection are similar to those of nuclear proliferation and other general fears that humans have too much power for our own good? Yeah, do we just need to grow
Yeah.
up?
Well, They are two methods that humans have or could have, because we're not really redirecting asteroids yet, but could have for destroying ourselves. I think Sagan had that concern. Daniel Dudney is a international relations or politician at Johns Hopkins. He wrote a book called Dark Skies, which is all about how these sort of existential risks increase when we go out to space. I think he's like at one end of the spectrum, and I'm not quite as far over as he is. But I do think that these are concerns that we need to think about, because they could be catastrophic, either accidentally or from terrorism or something. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yamil asks, and you might not know the question to the answer to this one, but is there a central manager of sorts at NASA that's overseeing the design of habitats on the moon and Mars, or are individual private companies doing their own designs and proposals?
So when we were researching the Mars chapter, we tried to find like a NASA plan that had all of the details. And there were like various, trajectories that had been considered. We weren't able to find any like specific, here is the square foot of the habitat. Here's how water is going to be recycled. NASA, as far as I could tell, didn't have a plan 2 years ago when we looked into this that was like that detailed. And I don't think that SpaceX does either. I think Musk is sort of has famously said, like, my job is the rockets. And the rest of you need to figure out the rest of the stuff, which I think is fine. He shouldn't be expected to have to figure out every problem related to space settlement. Although I do think he has a responsibility for making sure those problems have been solved before he sends people there. He doesn't have to solve them, but he should be sort of like up to date on where we are in those things. So there are people working on designs. I haven't seen any that are far enough along where I'd be like, we're ready to go.
Yep, yep. Well, Elon's stated goal is to die on Mars, which seems achievable at least, but
Yeah.
perhaps not the most inspiring thing to do. I don't know.
Well, he doesn't want to die on impact, I think he said, or famously
That's
says.
right.
He'd like to die an old man in his bed or something.
Okay, that's better. I like
Yeah.
that better.
Yeah.
Barbara Harris says, Frank mentioned that we are not sure of the effects of radiation on the human body. Out of all the effects of spaceflight on humans, the effects of radiation on the human body is something that is known, and dose effects are known. As for having a baby in space or off-world, as an OBGYN, that has always fascinated me. One of the biggest questions is getting pregnant in the first place. There may be big issues of what happens to ovulation in microgravity, so difficult to get pregnant.
Yeah, agreed. We
Mhm.
don't know enough about those questions.
And would you agree with their statement that the effects of radiation on the body is well known? Like, is there any difference between space radiation and Earth radiation that might be relevant? Or what's your
There is,
take on
yeah.
that?
So space has like galactic cosmic radiations, which are like big iron ions, and the radiation from the sun, like from a solar flare. We usually don't encounter much of that on the surface of Earth. And so when I was reading papers by people who study space radiation, there was a review from 2018 that sort of summed up the state of the field. This was written by Jeffrey Chancellor and his colleagues, where he essentially said, we don't even know that space radiation is going to cause cancer, but it's reasonable to assume that it can. And so part of the reason that it's so difficult to understand that stuff, so like Brookhaven National Laboratory just acquired a piece of equipment that can create essentially galactic cosmic radiation, so we can start studying that sort of stuff. But that'll tell us about galactic cosmic radiation in rodents. But it's not going to tell us about like galactic cosmic radiation coupled with, what happens during the solar flare. And like, it gets complicated. It's going to take a while to build up all of our knowledge. And that's on rats, which are often very applicable to humans, but not completely. And so I guess I would argue I don't think we have that problem completely figured out yet.
Yep, cool. Well, let's wrap things up on a more optimistic note and kind of how we should proceed. So in your book, you talk about the wait and go big approach. Let's talk about what that looks like if you were the supreme benevolent dictator of the universe.
Yeah, never gonna happen. But if it did, the waiting part, I'd like to wait until we've done a little bit more biology research, until we've created habitats that have these sort of closed loop recycling systems in them, and we've been able to show that they sort of run without breaking for multiple 2-year cycles. In terms of going big, when we were studying like various communities and that existed in sort of like harsh environments, or communities in company towns, which is like when you talk to the space advocate community, they often say that space is going to be like a commune. because you're going to have to share resources because it's still going to be expensive to send them up there, and not everybody's going to want to have their own kitchen. So you're going to need to sort of have communal living to some extent. So like a commune or a company town. So we researched both of those. And one thing that we found is that the ability to leave is really important. So in communes, when there's conflict between people, a great pressure valve is people being able to just go to a different commune or a different way of living altogether. Company towns, the way that employees have power over their employers is being able to threaten to leave and then actually leaving. And so for those sociological reasons, and then also for reasons about, like we talked about, psychology problems, it would be nice to have a big enough facility where you could like comfortably hold people until they got through their mental health crisis. And so, we feel like if we wait and then you go big so that there's enough options and there's enough people out there to take care of each other. And, it's a complicated argument we spend 400 pages sort of elaborating on. But if it was up to me, we'd spend a bunch of money solving these problems. We'd wait until we had better answers. I know we'll never have every question answered before we get out there, but we can get much closer, and then go big so that we've got sort of like a buffer and life will be a little bit more pleasant when we get there.
Right. Just don't rush into it, folks. I think that's the moral of the story. So
it's still awesome. I still want to see it happen, but we should probably not rush into it.
Absolutely. And there's, benefits to doing this research at home as well. Learning how to survive in an inhospitable climate, that might come in handy sometime, so
yeah,
it's still worthwhile work for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, again, folks, I'll wrap things up here. If you have any last minute questions. Oh, we do have a last minute question.
Ooh.
How much do you think potential space settlement would be motivated by competition, like the space race in the 1960s? Ooh.
Yeah. So some people would argue that we already have started a new space race with China.
Mm-hmm.
And so oh man, we could go down the rabbit hole about how vague international law is and how that sort of creates an increased likelihood of conflict, in my opinion, and how there's not a lot of clarity about what you're allowed to do with resources when you get up there. And I am aware that the U.S. does have a clear stance, which is that you are allowed to extract and sell those resources. And a fair number of countries are sort of signing on to the Artemis Accords in agreement. But yes, there could be a new space race. It would feel very different. So the old space race was about getting there, like touching the moon and then leaving. And so us being there doesn't stop anyone else from going. The new space race would be about, setting down in some of the best locales and then not leaving. And then there's sort of ambiguity about how legal that is and stuff. And so I think a new space race has higher potential to heat up, but I hope it does not.
Well, it could be a good thing or a bad thing. If it, accelerates developments, then that's good. But if it accelerates conflict, maybe not.
Sure. Yeah.
We'll see how it ends up. And I mean, China has this nice, shiny new space station that probably doesn't smell bad yet and has modern technology on it. So it's a concern. They're getting there pretty quickly. So
they are, yeah. And India's catching up. I mean, they're still not caught up to China or anything, but yeah, it's heating up.
Yeah, the good news is India signed the Artemis Accords recently, so that's potentially a good thing.
Yeah.
Cool. But yes, an optimistic note, folks. That's good. Yeah. So anyway, check out A City on Mars. I think we only talked about maybe 1/10 of the stuff you talk about in the book. There's just so much to talk about here with space settlement. Really a great book, and I enjoyed every word of it. And just so you guys know, it's an easy read. It looks thick, it looks like scary, but it's not. It's like super humorous, super funny, and your husband Zach did a great job injecting some really cool little diagrams in here too.
Thanks so much. I'll tell him.
Yeah. And thank him for keeping a corner of the internet fun still. That's we need more of that. Anything you want? Yes. Anything you want to plug before we wrap things up?
No, just the book. That's good. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much. Well, thanks so much for joining us here tonight, Kelly. And it was with joy, and I wish we could just talk all night. But again, thanks for writing the book. And if you're out there, go grab a copy at your favorite local or not so local bookseller.
Thanks. Right. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All
right. Cool. All right. Let's go back to club news here. Thanks so much, Kelly. And first, I need to figure out how to share my screen again. How about that one? All right. I think I did that right. All right, club news, folks. Lots going on. So our next Geneva Dark Sky event is going to be on March 9th, weather permitting. And as you may have heard, we're in like one of the biggest El Ninos ever, like in the past 80 years, which has made things a little bit cloudy. Florida has not been living up to the Sunshine State moniker lately, I'm afraid. But let's hope we get lucky on March 9th and we get some clear skies for that one. That's our next slot. So put that on the calendar. We do need volunteers for managing the Geneva site. Unfortunately, we've had a couple of our existing folks that manage the gate there be taken up by other obligations. So if you're willing to help out, and all you got to do is figure out how to get the key for the gate there and open it up and close it up at night. It's not hard, but we really do need some help with that. So please contact observing@cfas.org if you're able to pitch in. If you're a Geneva regular, we could really use another hand there. Our next in-person meeting is coming up before you know it on Saturday, March 2nd at 6 p.m. And that will be at the planetarium, of course. We're trying a new format this time in response to some of your feedback. So we've heard from you that you have individual interests. You want to meet more people, like you like the social aspect of the club. So we're going to make it a little bit easier to go out and meet like-minded people. Don't worry if you're like me and a hardcore introvert. You can still just watch the presentations. That's an option too. But we're going to have multiple sessions and interest groups going on simultaneously. So we'll all start off in the planetarium, and we have Sharifa Gassel lined up for a immersive presentation about her astro adventures on the planetarium dome. That should be cool. And we'll have some sort of orientation and introductory remarks there. But after that, you're going to split up and go wherever you want to go. So Derek's going to be running his planetarium program, Central Florida Nights, basically on a loop throughout the evening there. So you can go check that out whenever you want. We're also going to have a room full of free stuff. So Christopher Hunt, our loaner program chair, is going to bring along some of the stuff we've been trying to clear out of our storage unit. So there might be some free goodies there for you to pick up or maybe bid on. We also have a bunch of books that were donated to the club, so free books as well. So we'll have a little bit of a astronomy bazaar going on in one of the rooms there as well at the same time. Also, Tricia Smedley is going to be leading a discussion group on SpaceX and spaceflight stuff, where maybe you can talk about the stuff we just talked about here on A City on Mars. And weather permitting again, we will have outdoor observing as well out in the faculty lot. So if the weather cooperates, bring your telescope, and we will have someone on hand to keep an eye on them for you if you're going to be inside doing other stuff. So that should be fun. Watch your emails for more details on that. But March 2nd, 6 p.m., be there. It'll be good. More club news. So this Saturday night, we're running the Shoot the Moon workshop, which is our first astrophotography workshop for the year. Registration is required. There are, last I checked, about 3 slots left. Let me drop a link to that in the chat here. So if you are interested in participating, you can do so. There we go. But yeah, space is limited because we want to keep a good student to teacher ratio there. Wes Clem and John Starr and Mark Pernall are going to be on hand, as well as myself, to kind of go around and help people processing their images. It looks like the weather is not going to be very nice on Saturday night, so this will just be an image processing workshop. If you have images of your own of the moon to bring with you, we can help you in trying to get the most out of them. And we'll also have some images of our own that you can work with as well. So even if you don't have a moon image of your own to work with, I have a bunch of thumb drives that I'm bringing with a bunch of data on it that people have contributed, so we can play with that as well. So if you want to learn more about astrophotography and processing images, stop on by. And a lot of the techniques we're going to talk about are also applicable to things like Jupiter and Saturn and Mars and imaging those as well. Also, in other news, we have started, I hit the wrong button, automatic renewals for memberships. So the next time you have to go to renew your membership, you will get another notification from John Frank when your membership is up. But going forward, John Frank will not have to nag you about it. We're going to have an automatic auto renewal system in place. Now, it's not mandatory. You can definitely opt out of it after the fact if you want. And we have set it up so that you'll get a notification before it does auto renew. So you can decide at that point whether or not you want to let that happen or not. But this should simplify the renewal process for memberships quite a bit going forward. And that's also something that people brought up in our member survey. So we're listening, folks. We're trying to do better. Upcoming outreach events, quite a few of them coming up. Orlando Science Center on the 17th. That's same night as our Shoot the Moon workshop. The Esplanade Star Party on the 19th. Maitland Public Library on March 7th. Groveland Star Party on March 8th. The Groveland Hong Kong student event on March 27th. If you want to deal with some international students there and kind of spread your joy of the cosmos even wider. Stenstrom Elementary on March 28th. If you want to get involved in any of these upcoming events, please contact outreach@cfas.org. or respond to the relevant threads on cfas.groups.io. Also, I want to mention that we have created a new subgroup in Groups.io for outreach. You can reach that at cfas.groups.io/g/outreach. So if you do want to get involved and you're not already in that group, please just go there and join. Outreach is a core part of our mission, and it's also very personally rewarding. It's a great way to meet people that share your interests, and a great way to spread what you do and spread the joy and wonder of the cosmos to other people. It feels good, folks. So I definitely recommend getting into that if you can. Little quick thank you to people who did outreach in January. We had a bunch of events last month as well. I think we probably had one of the most active outreach programs of pretty much any astronomy club out there. Bach Tower, Goldsboro Elementary, Flaming Arrow Cub Camp, Suds and Scopes, Rainbow Elementary, Harmony Elementary, Lake Nona Middle School, St. Cloud Elementary, and an event at Canaveral National Seashore last month. Thanks to everyone who participated. Len Ward, Sam and Margaret Selig, Mark Pernal, Bill Castro, Mark Femininio, Bob and Ginger Leftwich, Amit Gupta, Jeffrey Martin, John Allen, Eric Hoyne, Derek Demeter, Sharif Gassel, Isabel Chauffeton, and anybody else that I forgot. Again, great bunch of people, and I encourage you all to get involved in outreach if you haven't already. Upcoming astronomical events. So the big eclipse is coming on April 8th. So I know a lot of you are going to be traveling out to Texas and whatnot to try and catch a glimpse of that. And if you haven't made your travel arrangements already, it's almost too late. Things are filling up fast. So think about that if you want to be a part of that. From an observing standpoint, we're entering galaxy season. So right now, if you go and look up, you'll still see the Orion Nebula and that cool stuff just as the night falls. But it's going to set pretty quickly. So for long exposure astrophotography, we're getting into the springtime, where most of the targets are going to be galaxies that are facing outside of the galactic plane, such as this image here of, I believe that's M81. And a lot of conjunctions coming up. So on February 22nd, Venus and the Mars will be within about half a degree. New moon this month will be on March 10th. So let's hope for clear skies around then. And the moon is going to be having a bunch of close calls with different planets. So March 7th, 4 degrees from Mars, March 8th, 3 degrees from Venus, March 13th, 4 degrees from Jupiter, and March 14th, 3 degrees from Uranus. Well, that one probably won't look like much, but those other ones will be pretty cool. And also Venus will be within 0.3 degrees of Saturn on March 21st. So that could be a pretty interesting astrophotography challenge for folks. That definitely lies within the field of view of most telescopes. So that would be a pretty cool picture to get. And also a very challenging one to get because Venus and Saturn are very, very, very different brightnesses. So if you guys figure that out, I guess you could do a composite thing and make that work, right? Also a reminder, we're still trying to find a home for this Software Bisque Paramount, my T mount. This is a really, really nice mount. It's the same one that I use myself in my observatory. Can't say enough good things about it. I don't even need a guide scope with it because its tracking is that accurate. So if anyone's looking for a really high quality mount and are looking to do long exposure astrophotography and keeping that as easy as possible, this is a great opportunity. This was bequested to CFAS from the late Kent Allingham, who was our treasurer. And by the way, his services are going to be on February 24th for those who knew him. Let me go ahead and drop that link into the chat as well. So if you're able to attend that or contribute to the to ALS or to his local church, there are details in there as well if you're so inclined. But a great way to honor his memory would be to keep this mount within the club. So if you are interested, please contact Christopher Hunt at loners@cfas.org or stop by and talk to him about it on March 2nd. We would love to see this find a good home within the club before we put it out there more widely to the public at large. And also a little bit of a call for help here. The CFAS board needs you. We do have coverage for pretty much all these functions right now, but a lot of people on the board are pulling double duty, and some of our terms are going to be up at the end of the year. So we really need to bring in some fresh blood and get people spun up on how some of these operations work in order to ensure continuity of the society. So if you are passionate about CFAS, and I think the people that are watching this right now are among our most passionate members, please consider joining. You can be involved in the treasurer side if you're into numbers, science, outreach, loners, membership, programs, finding cool speakers like the one we had tonight, publicity and education. We're all looking for extra help. So send me a note at president@cfas.org if you're interested at all. And we would love to have you on board. It's easy to get started with the board. We have a couple of board member at large positions that are kind of intended to get your feet wet with the board, and just kind of like learn how things operate. So you don't have to get thrown into it right away. And you can also just sort of serve on a committee as well and sort of help out behind the scenes. So I do encourage y'all to get involved there if you can. I noticed a question came in. Oh yeah, Bill Castro says, "How about a swap meet at the in-person meeting? Members can bring items they want to sell. Why not? If you got stuff you want to bring along and try to find a new home for, by all means, bring it. We can bring that into the little bazaar section there, maybe. So yeah, go for it, Bill. I'm not going to stop you. It's a good idea." And with that, let's go to our astrophotography showcase. It's been cloudy, but somehow y'all have gotten photos this month. So let's take a look at what we have. I'll start with mine. So this is the one that I managed to get this past month. This is NGC 2336 and IC 4667. Like I mentioned, we're getting into galaxy season here. And here's my contribution. I've kind of like imaged all the big galaxies out there already. So I'm kind of at that phase where I'm looking at the more obscure ones. These two are 100 million light years away. Think about that, folks. I mean, when the light from this left that galaxy, there were still dinosaurs on Earth, like T-Rex and stuff, right? So, likewise, if these folks are looking back at us, there's dinosaurs that they're seeing here. So obviously it's not probably possible to actually see a dinosaur from that distance, but in theory, it's fun to think about, right? You're seeing some really ancient photons here and really looking back in time, which always excites me about astrophotography. This is made with my usual setup, a Skywatcher 190 MN telescope on a Paramount MIT mount, like the one we just talked about, and an ASI 2600 Pro camera. Probably about 13 hours or so of exposure time, if I remember right. Up next, we have Wes Clem. Let me open up the microphone to you, Wes.
Hello, hello.
Hello, there you are. Got a couple of really cool images from you this month. Tell us what we're looking at.
There we go. That's the hidden galaxy, IC 342, I think.
Yep.
This galaxy is actually not that far away when I was researching it. I think it's estimated to be somewhere between like 7 and 11 million light years away, which is, cosmically not that far. But it lies along the like our galactic equator, so it's pretty obscured by our own dust in the galaxy. And so that's what makes it so dim. I was really amazed. This image is about 21 hours or so. I couldn't believe how dim it still was once I like finished stacking and everything. I was like, oh, like I was a little disappointed at first when how dim it seemed, but I was able to stretch it and get it up to this brightness, and it turned out pretty okay, I think.
Yeah, definitely some rich colors there in the middle there, and you can definitely see the dust lanes there. My understanding is that this is so close to the galactic plane that, that might be obscuring some of the light coming to us. I don't know how true that is, but it would definitely explain some of that dimness potentially.
Sure. I think at least the Wikipedia article said that if it weren't obscured, it would be visible to the naked eye in a dark sky. So
Yep.
it's that close and that bright that it would be a bright one if it were just in a different place.
Yeah, and let's talk gear. So you're using the Player One Poseidon M camera on this one, right?
That's correct. Yeah, this is my first like solid long exposure like I usually do using the Player One, the Poseidon, and I'm really happy with it. Uh, I had initially captured a little bit of data with my 294, the ZWO ASI 294,
Mhm.
and when I kind of tried to merge that data in, more integration time is always better, that whole thing. I couldn't get it to blend well because the 294s was just so much more noisy. Like the Poseidon, that sensor is just so clean. Um, I'm just really happy with it. I'm really excited about what I'll be able to do with it.
Awesome. 21 hours on this one, right? Like,
That's correct. Yeah,
wow.
about 11 or so is luminance, and the rest is RGB.
That was my next question, how you split that up. And how long are your sub exposures?
For the luminance, they are 30 seconds because I'm in Winter Park, so my bortle is something like 7 to 8, depending on which direction I'm looking. So after about 30 seconds, my read noise is swamped. I don't need to expose any longer. So I deal with lots and lots of exposures on that. I want to say it was about 1,300 luminance exposures just to get the detail. And then the
Whoa.
RGB, each red and each green and each blue, those are each about 60 seconds.
I can't
Again,
imagine the disk space you ate on that.
my average evening, if I image luminance all night long, I use probably somewhere in the range of 40 to 60 gigs, something like that.
Wow, amazing results, especially from Winter Park. My gosh, nicely done.
Thank you.
Speaking of nicely done, what do we have here?
That is Thor's helmet.
Mhm.
That's I believe in the center that is a Wolf Rayet star that's
Yep.
kind of, shed its skins and going berserk there. Uh, it's similar to the Bubble Nebula in that like it's thrown off its outer shell of gas and stuff like that, and then is turning it into an emission nebula. It's irradiating that own stuff that's been blown off of it. Um, and this is with the same camera, my same setup. This is they're basically imaged on the same night as my Hidden Galaxy. All across like the 10 or 15 nights that I did it on.
Yeah, your ability to pull out detail on oxygen from light polluted skies is amazing to me. So, how much of that 20 hours did you spend on oxygen versus sulfur and hydrogen?
I want to say probably nine, eight or nine,
Wow.
I think.
So pretty even. Wow.
Yeah. Again, on this one, I had a bunch of sulfur that I had initially done back in November with my 294. And again, I tried to blend that sulfur in with the sulfur that I got on the Poseidon, and it was just not even worth trying. The noise was much better with less integration time on the Poseidon than blending the two.
Yeah. It's amazing how quickly the technology is moving.
It's great. Yeah, I love it.
Nicely done, Wes. Thank you. And if you want to learn more from Wes, he'll be on hand Saturday night, right, for our Shoot the Moon workshop.
Yes, sir.
Looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you for participating. Speaking of advancing technology, John Pinto's been playing with his Sea Star. Let me open the mic to you. There you go. NGC 2903. I like that target.
Yes, it was one of the targets suggested for this month by Charlie Bracken. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about him in the future.
Yep.
I was just wanted to just see if the Sea Star could even, get anything from it. And I think this was about an hour on it. It's about 30 million light years away, if I recall. And I was just surprised I couldn't even get those little wispy arms that are starting to come out of the top and the bottom just with an hour in a driveway that's got a street light right at the end of it. And Frank, I know what that's like.
Oh yeah.
The difference is this doesn't have any narrowband imaging. This is just straight color camera. It's obviously a ZWO technology using a Sony sensor. And yeah, I'm very happy with it.
Yeah. And this is a good example of doing a longer exposure on the Sea Star. So that's good to see too. 60 minutes is one of the longer ones I've seen. So I'm glad to see that it comes out. Yeah, that's pretty darn good. Was there any post-processing that you did on this, or is this
Nope.
straight off the device?
It's just straight off. The only thing that I would say that was done with this is one of the new features of the Sea Star is you can now stack multiple nights. So this might be 2 nights where I had like 30 minutes on one night, 30 minutes on another night, but that's about it. I mean, you can still see there's probably a meteor trail or a satellite trail in there. So I obviously did not do very much processing on this thing.
Yeah, cool. But yeah, that's exciting results for sure. And we also have M1, the Crab Nebula.
Yep. And Frank, I don't know if it's just getting cut off at the bottom, but at the bottom of these, typically it'll tell you how long the exposure was. But I believe this was, I'm going to say 20 minutes, if I remember. So it's not a lot of time, and yet you can start seeing some color in it. Yeah, I normally don't do a long session with the Sea Star because that's not my goal with this. My goal is eventually to use it for outreach. And I don't think the kids are going to sit there for an hour waiting for an image to show up. So I've been trying to see what you can do in, say, 10 minutes, 10, 20 minutes to get something visually interesting for the outreach visitors to see.
Yeah, and I don't know if Zoom is cutting things off. From my view here, it does have the 21 minutes at the bottom in the target name. So apologies if Zoom is doing bad things.
No, that's fine.
So is this through the light pollution filter that it comes with, or is this straight RGB?
Yes. So it basically has it actually has 3 filters, but the one filter is just so it can create its darks. But its two main filters is an IR filter. That if you're not using the dual band filter, it will just automatically put the IR filter in there, and that's mainly mostly to do with the optics of the C-Star to get a clean image. Otherwise, you'd have all kinds of you'd have a lot of fog. Let's just put it in your images that the IR filter cuts out. But the other thing is, if you're doing emission nebula, which a lot of what is interesting to look at in the night sky, it comes with a dual band filter, so it'll capture, I believe it's the hydrogen and oxygen. So that's obviously why you got starting to see color in the Crab Nebula.
Yeah, very cool, very cool.
Just one last piece to that. When you're using the C-Star, it will actually tell you, you know what, you might want to turn the emission nebula filter on, which they call a light pollution filter, but it's really an emission nebula filter. So
right.
It helps you.
Cool. Yeah, M1 is surprisingly small in the sky. It's a tough target for any system, really. So
yeah, and it was actually very hard for me to get this, even in Geneva. The first time I tried this was I forget where we were, in November, December, and it wasn't that high in the sky at the time. It was maybe 25, 30 degrees above the horizon, and the C-Star couldn't lock onto it because it's very dim around the Crab. So the C-Star does plate solving. That's how it knows, that it's pointing in the right place. But if it can't see enough stars, it'll just say, "Hey, I can't see this thing," or "I can't lock onto it." So I was really happy that I could even get this.
Yeah, it's a famous target, but a surprisingly difficult one. So well done. And by the way, I just noticed that I missed a question from you. Sorry about that. You asked.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, anything to learn from C-Lab. There actually is a chapter in the book about biosphere 2, which is kind of a similar topic. So
yeah.
what they learned from that. And the news from that was optimistic, by the way. Like biosphere 2 was not the abject failure that people make it out to be. Like it showed that maybe this could actually work and have a closed ecosystem that is sustainable. But buy the book to learn more.
That's right.
Yep. Cool. Moving on. Hey, M35.
Right. So this was interesting because I wasn't actually planning this. It was the night I was trying to grab the Crab Nebula. And one of the things that I've found with the C-Star is it takes it a while to kind of figure out the night sky for it to create its internal model. So what I found works really well is shoot a nice, bright, open cluster, because there's lots of stars and the C-Star can plate solve very easily and adjust its internal sky model. So I was just doing M35 just to do that. Bill Castro walked over and he said, "Oh, that's kind of cool. What about that other small little, cluster next to it, NGC 2158? Can you get that in the same frame?" And one of the things with the C-Star you have to be conscious of is that it does have a small field of view. Well, I should say comparatively small field of view. So I believe it's like 1.25 degrees tall and like 0.75 degrees wide. So there's a lot of places in the sky where you would love it to be a lot bigger because it doesn't have a mosaic mode built in yet. They're working on that. So I said, I don't know, I'll see. So there's a way you can adjust the field of view, what you want to look at, and you can move the C-Star around a little bit. And I said, oh, it looks like I could get them. So I started re-imaging it. And one of the things you can do in the C-Star is it's got a button on it that you can press, and it'll actually, like you see here, put a circle around what it thinks you're looking at and label it for you, so that when you do save the image, you can, a lot of times you're looking at something and say, I don't remember what that is, right? So that's very helpful.
Yep. Yeah, 2158 looks pretty dense. Is that a open or a globular? I don't actually know.
I believe it's an open, but it definitely looks like it's got some dust in it, right?
Yeah. Cool. Very cool target.
Was that a 10-minute, if you could see the bottom of that one?
Oh, gosh, how do I go back? 8 minutes, it says.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah. Like I said, it was just more of a helping the C-Star with its plate solving more than anything else. But it looked nice, so I kept it.
Well, the good thing
And
about clusters is that, they are relatively bright targets. So even if there's a full moon out or something like that, like you
yep,
can still observe them pretty well.
exactly. And globulars too.
Yep.
This is this Thor's helmet. Obviously, Wes is, a million times better than this. But again, I'm trying to find targets that would be good for outreach that I don't have to spend a hell of a lot of time on, and I can get it show to people without them saying, well, come back in an hour and we'll have something for you to see. If I remember right, was this about 20 minutes?
21 minutes, yes, as opposed to 20 hours from Wes. So
Yeah, exactly.
very different. But yeah, that's definitely Thor's helmet. Like you can actually, it looks more like Thor's helmet, I think, in these shorter exposures, right? So that's kind of cool. Looks more like a TIE fighter when you go deeper, if you ask me. But nicely done. And we have one last fun one from you here.
I thought you were going to get the one from Eric. Eric had a much, much better picture of that bald eagle.
I didn't
But
get that
anyway,
one.
it was fun because I walked over and I was looking at what Eric was doing, Eric Moore, and he was, waiting for the sky to get dark, and I was actually doing some solar, and so I was just walking around, and they said, and he pointed in way in the distance. So this is probably 500 yards away. I mean, it wasn't like close. But he had his DSLR and he had his telephoto out, and he said, "Yeah, come and look at this." And in the telephoto in the DSLR, it was so bright you could definitely tell it was a bald eagle. So I said, "Well, I'm going to try." The Sea Star has what they call a scenery mode, and it's pretty decent. And I thought it would, and it was really funny. It was that little bird just decided to land on the branch next to him, and I said, "Oh, this is great. I just have to there's more to Geneva than just the stars."
Absolutely. It is funny how much of an overlap there is between birding and astrophotography. I'm guilty of it myself. And kudos for good framing there as well. I see good use of the rule of thirds there too. So nicely done.
I tried.
All right. Thank you, John. Awesome stuff.
Yep.
Up next, Caleb Bird. I think I saw you in here. Oh, maybe not. Oh no, I don't see you. If you're under a different name or something, go ahead and hit that raise hand icon so I can see you. But if not, I'll just talk about what we're seeing here. Obviously, M51, the Whirlpool Galaxy, one of my favorite targets. And again, we're in galaxy season, so this is the sort of thing you'd be looking at right now. Kind of a little pair of galaxies where one looks like it's eating the other. But if I remember right, he was doing this with a DSLR using like 10-second exposures over many, many hours. So, Wes was talking about kind of data piling up. I can imagine he had the same thing going on here. That's an awful lot of exposures to stack and process. So nicely done, Caleb. Thank you for sharing your image of M51. And Cal Beard, I know you're here. Let me push the button and open your mic. Go ahead and accept that invitation to speak if you would.
Hello.
All right, we got you. Yeah, so we got some M42 action here.
Yep, that's my first attempt with my Sea Star. I just received it.
Nice. Yeah, perfect target to start with. Nice and bright and high in the sky as the sun goes down. Nicely done. What's the exposure time on this one? Doesn't actually say. Do you remember?
46
minutes. There it is. Yep. From Leesburg. Very cool. Yeah, so what's your first impression of the Sea Star?
It renewed my astronomy life.
Wow, that's high praise. Awesome.
So I had given up on moving my 11-inch Celestron, and mostly because I had a hard time picking it up and moving it around. So I thought I'd try a Sea Star.
Yeah, I hear you. It's really changing the game for a lot of people. I've got a C11 at home here too, and I do not bring it out anywhere near as much as I want to. Because it's just inconvenient. In contrast, I have a solar scope on one of those Solar Quest mounts where you just plop it down and it does its thing automatically, kind of like the Sea Star, and I use that all the time. So there's a lot to be said for convenience, absolutely. And you got a really fun one up here next. Speaking of scenery mode.
So I tried scenery mode. I'm a subcontractor for SpaceX, so I went over by the main assembly building and set up my Sea Star to look over there towards the launch site.
Yeah, not jealous at all. My gosh, let me run this video.
I hadn't thought that I needed sunglasses, but after that thing took off, it was very much like a sunrise.
Wow.
I couldn't see part of it.
3 miles away, you said, right?
Yeah, it's about 3 miles.
That's incredible. That rivals anything you
Lens
see
flare.
online. Yep. Oh man. Those are always fun launches too, just having the boosters come back and the sonic booms and whatnot. Sonic Boom woke us up last night at 1 a.m. I wasn't too keen on that, but it was going to the moon, so it's still something that makes you smile. Yeah, very cool stuff. So yeah, Sea Star also good for rocket launches. That's amazing. Thanks so much, Cal. Looking forward to your next adventures with the Sea Star next time.
I'll see you at our next in-person meeting.
Absolutely great. Looking forward to it. Yeah, March 2nd, folks. Don't forget. Hope to see y'all there. And again, some of you, I will be seeing you on Saturday night at the Shoot the Moon event. And with that, let me close things down for this month. Oh, John Pinto is raising a hand. John, I think you're still unmuted if you want to say something.
Just wanted to mention that one of the other breakout sessions at the in-person event is we're going to do a room for the Sea Star users and people potentially interested in the Sea Star.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So we'll have a little Sea Star users group and people that are Sea Star curious. Go hang out there as well. Cool. I'll add that to the list. Awesome, folks. Well, I'll see you soon. And thanks again for tuning in. I think that was a really fascinating conversation we had with Kelly Weinersmith. Again, I'll plug her book, A City on Mars. You may have noticed a trend in that the people that I'm reading tend to be the people that I book for guests here. So we reached out to her, not the other way around, because I think it's a really good book. So that's my personal endorsement. And again, I'm reading a book by Mike Massimino right now, the famous astronaut. So we'll see where that goes. All right, folks, we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in, and watch for a video of this on YouTube tomorrow morning sometime. Thanks, folks. See you next time.